Yeah, that's my presentation. I've gotten some really great questions as we go along, but any further questions, I'm happy to answer, talk some more about anything that you guys are interested in.
Yeah, that's a very interesting. Lot of information I learned. I think everybody learned a lot of information. Thank you. There are some more questions, but it was going, the flow was going, so I didn't want to interrupt. But one question, I think they just still want to have some clarification on the. Um, One second, I'm just going to get this the beta. The. I'm sorry, there are so many questions.
Oh, no problem. I'm happy to hear it. That means people are really interested.
Yes, maybe in the meantime I can go from the bottom to the top. That's faster. Okay. So they're asking what kind of chocolate you are working with.
Me personally, so I've worked with a few different kinds, but the kinds that I've worked with the most are Calibo and Guittard. I've been working with Calibo Dark 811, which is a specific type of Calibo Dark, and Calibo Milk 823, I believe. I have been in Guittard. I've been working with their milk chocolate, one of their milk chocolates, which is Soleil d'Or, I believe, and then their dark chocolate, Soleil something else.
Okay.
But yeah, those are the main four that I've been working with. Calibo has all kinds of interesting flavors. They are embroiled in a little bit of a lawsuit right now with some child labor allegations, which I've personally switched to Guittard for right now. I mean, in the chocolate industry, it's really difficult to trace kind of the origins and make sure that everything is really produced ethically. So I just try my best to stay on top of who is doing their best right now. And at the moment, that seems like it's Guittard. I'm always happy to learn more and try to be on the ethical side of chocolate production because that's very important.
So have you tried any of those bean to bar or the two ingredient chocolates? Because the guitar and all those things are still they are compound chocolates. So have you tried the bean to bar chocolate in your machine?
So the short answer is no. I mean, we've done some looking at it. The problem is just like we don't have a lot of bean to bar people that we're working with at the moment. I would love that to change, but we just haven't gotten a lot of chocolate to try in the machine that is two ingredient. Because we have that really precise temperature control, I see it as working perfectly. We just have to find the right temperatures, and that's something that's part of the R&D process that we really figured out how to go about figuring that out. We just haven't gotten a chance to really try it that much. I think bean to bar two ingredient chocolate is delicious and fascinating, and I would love to work with it more. So whoever wants to connect with me on that, absolutely find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and let me know. Also, my email. I don't know if I want to give out my email, but email hello@CocoPress and we can get connected.
And then how to avoid over crystallization during the tempering?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The over crystallization, how can they prevent?
Okay, over crystallization. So it's kind of one of those things that you can do a little bit about once it's happening, but the way to prevent it is to just do it better next time. The thing you can do about it is, for the most part, just heat it up like a few degrees. And by a few, I mean less than 3 degrees Celsius. Once you have gotten to over crystallization, you can gently try to melt away some of those crystals by heating it up just a tiny bit. But it's dangerous because if you overheat it just a little bit, you get rid of all of your crystals or too many of them, and then you can cast that chocolate in, it's undercrystallized. So kind of your best bet is just keeping really careful notes and trying and doing it in small batches at first, and then trying the next time to have it at a slightly higher working temperature so that you hit that perfect kind of Goldilocks temperature where it's not too hot and not too cold.
Okay, and then if you manually temper a large volume of chocolate, how do you maintain this in temper for 30 minutes to 1 hour when you are molding?
So the easy answer there is some type of mixing tempering machine. I mean, I love my Revelation machine because it continues to mix it, and anytime it gets too cold, it heats it up. Um, if you just have a bowl of chocolate that you are working with, you gotta check the temperature constantly. I mean, an instant read thermometer is great. Those surface thermometers that you just like kind of shoot a laser looking thing at the surface of your chocolate are okay. A candy instant read chocolate thermometer is best. And then just anytime you see it dipping more than a couple degrees or even a couple degrees below that temper point that you're working at, you want to heat it back up gently. So I recommend like hitting the outside of it with a hair dryer or a heat gun, or if you want to put it in a uh, a double boiler, or like over some water, as long as you're very careful not to get any water in your chocolate. Another thing is you want to be constantly mixing it. So if you have for this kind of thing, it's great to have somebody helping you. You can have someone mixing it and checking the temperature constantly. And then if it needs a little bit of heat, giving it a little bit of heat very gently. And then you're casting it or pouring it. If you have a machine, like I have, that kind of does all that work for you. So I don't know, maybe look into some Cocoa Town machinery, but I've found a machine takes it from being something that is like a very delicate dance that is difficult to do with less than 2 people to something that I can absolutely do by myself.
Okay, the next one is they want to know what's a seed crystal. Is it a tempered or is it like a sourdough starter?
It's kind of like a sourdough starter. I mean, a seed crystal, the thing is, a seed crystal is any chocolate that is type 5 beta crystals. I mean, what I usually do is I've got my bag of chocolate that I'm going to melt down and try to cast into something. I just save, a third of the chocolate and melt the other 2/3. And then when I'm seeding, I slowly add in bits of that remaining third of the chocolate, because all you need is stuff that is already beta 5 crystals. It doesn't need to be, I mean, I believe Calabo sells like, they call it like Calabo silk or something like that. And it's just a bag of like dust basically. And it's pre-crystallized tiny little cocoa butter crystals. But if you add that, it increases your cocoa butter percentage. So the way I usually seed is I just reserve a little bit of the pre-crystallized chocolate and add it in later. It kind of is a sourdough starter in that, like, well, it's little chunks of the chocolate that you want to end up with. So if you don't have perfectly crystallized chocolate, you can't do that, and you have to do the 3-step temper.
And then they're asking if you add your seed when your chocolate is over 34.5 degrees, don't you kill the seed?
Yeah, that's why I seed early, seed often, because the first chocolate I add in my seeding process is usually sacrificial. It usually melts, but it helps the chocolate cool down, and it helps get those seed crystals started really early, because even if you melt most of it, there's going to be a little bit of it that starts the crystallization process. And if you don't add them early, you may be sacrificing less of your chocolate, but there's a potential for other crystal types to be able to start to form more than your type 5. So if you seed early, you may lose some chocolate, but you're definitely going to get good temper. If you don't seed early, you may lose less chocolate, but you may also just end up with bad temper and then have to redo the whole thing anyway.
Okay, the next question is how fast should I cool the temper chocolate to solidify once chocolate is seeded in order to have the most beta 5 crystals?
So that doesn't really matter. I mean, it if it's properly seeded, those crystals are going to grow no matter what. I mean, you can cool it really fast, you can cool it slower. It doesn't super matter as long as you've done your seeding well. If you cool it really fast, the shape that you're trying to make is more likely to warp. You're more likely to get a chocolate bar that kind of like pops out of the molds. like you saw, and not pops out in a good way, like curves. Oh, something I didn't quite mention, but something to look for that also tells you have a really good temper is if you've cast a piece of chocolate and you look at the underside of the mold and it's almost completely detached from the mold. Like when I cast chocolates, I have flat molds and I usually put something like a plate on the other side of the mold and then I flip it, and my chocolates usually fall right out, or I just see like a tiny portion where they're attached, because a properly tempered chocolate is going to shrink a little bit, and that shrinkage is going to pull it away from the mold. So you should be able to see it mostly separated.
Okay. And then they want to know what's the ideal temperature of the chocolate mold to avoid temperature shock in the chocolate, like when you are molding it.
Room temperature. So you want to let your molds, like don't refrigerate your molds, because the refrigeration can cause, well, I mean, it can cause chocolate shock, but also it can cause condensation on the surface, which leads to bloom where your mold touches the chocolate. But I have my mold sitting in an enclosed box, just, because I'm hyper specific about that, but you can just have your mold sitting on a shelf next to where you're going to temper, and make sure that they're at the same temperature as the room, so that as your chocolate is cooling, it's cooling at the same rate as it would if it was just plopped right on the table. As long as your table isn't marble, because marble makes things cool faster, because as I said, it sucks heat out really fast.
So this one is, I always thought that type 6 crystals in chocolate stored for a long time made the chocolate harder with a more granular melt on the palate. Then why does the chocolate stored for a long time feel harder on the palate?
Yeah, that's to do with the crystals being more stable. So as I mentioned, when a chocolate transitions from a lower type to a higher type, it's more stable. It's more well packed. Those triglycerides are packed just a little tighter. And them being packed tighter means it requires more energy, whether that's heat or like kinetic energy of breaking it, that requires more energy to separate those crystals. And that's why it feels grainier and harder, because you're having to put more energy into melting that structure down. And it feels grainy also because that process of it turning from type 5 to type 6 crystals causes a lot of bloom and separation of the fats and the sugars from the chocolate. And that process means that what gives you the smoothness is when all of those ingredients are really well distributed and evenly distributed through your chocolate. It feels grainy when the fat is separated from the sugar, which is sometimes even separated from like the non-fatty cocoa solids. And all of this are really, like, if you imagine kind of camouflage, that's what that can look like when they're all separated out, just like on a really small scale. And each of those different portions has a different texture. And so you're basically melting a ton of different textures on your tongue at once, which makes it feel grainy.
Okay, the last, I think one more question is, when they pull the chocolate from the mold, it marks the chocolate at the spot. Any reason why?
It melts the chocolate at the spot they're pouring it.
This is, okay, let me read it. It says, I have noticed the last bit that pulls away from the mold marks the chocolate at that spot. Any reason why?
So I guess it depends on what you mean by melting. What I'm thinking of is if you are pulling the chocolate away from the mold, you shouldn't ever have to pull your chocolate very hard out of a mold. If your chocolate sticks to the mold, that means it isn't quite properly tempered. Because chocolate should, if it's tempered in that beta 5 way you want, it should shrink off the mold itself and maybe just have like a tiny portion that's stuck to the mold still. That is just to do with, like, if you imagine like a flat surface of a bar that you're molding, it's going to shrink like this away from the mold, but there's a portion in the center that may not shrink enough to pull away from it. And for that, I mean, when we cast our bars that we do the custom printed messages on, I'll flip over the mold and it'll pop out of the mold, but there'll be usually a place in the center that's just a tiny bit stuck to the mold. And when you pull it off, it's got this kind of circular pattern on it a little bit right around that spot. I have I believe it's beaver hair brush that I can brush over the surface and it won't scratch it. It just very gently polishes away that center spot. But if your chocolate is sticking to the mold in the center, that means that it's probably a little too hot and it's not crystallizing quite right in the center. I don't know if that answers your question. If not, I will try to answer it maybe a little bit better in my typed response at the end of this.
Yeah, Dr. Dan said that's called the release mark at the center of the mold, the last bit that holds on. But I think, yeah.
Yeah, it usually holds on just a little bit. I mean, you can't expect your chocolate to be completely separated from the mold. As long as it mostly separates, you know you're doing things right. That last bit, I usually just polish off with a little brush.
And if you're making chocolate spread, do you know which crystal is the type is best?
Chocolate spread. So usually for recipes, the crystal type doesn't super matter. I would say just do whatever your recipe says, because at that point, when you're mixing chocolate into a recipe, like a chocolate spread, I guess by chocolate spread, I'm kind of wondering if you're meaning like ganache or like a chocolate dip for strawberries or something. You are probably going to, just by the virtue of working with the recipe, end up with either a seized chocolate, aka one that you've mixed with water, or a lower crystal type chocolate, which is totally fine. For chocolate spreads, as in like maybe something you would put on bread or a pastry of some kind, it depends on the look you're going for. If you want it to be shiny and hard, then you still want type 5 crystals, beta 5. If you don't really care if it's shiny, but you want it to not bloom, then you probably want to go for type 4, some of those higher crystal types that are not quite type 5, because those are going to bloom a little bit less. But they still will bloom. So keep that in mind kind of for the shelf life of your whatever you're making, how long you want it to go without blooming. And if you mix it with other fats, like there are recipes, ganaches won't bloom because they're specifically made to not bloom. But chocolate recipes that involve chocolate generally take that into account.
Somebody is asking, have you tried chocolate made from Theobroma bicolor? That's a type of the cocoa bean that grows in some parts. It's a whitish chocolate it makes. So have you done any tempering with that?
Ooh, I haven't. That sounds really cool, though. I'm going to have to copy that down from the chat later and look that up, because that sounds really interesting.
Bicolor, and the chocolate, it's a dark chocolate, but it will look like a milk chocolate. So they want.
That's really interesting. No, I haven't tried that. Yeah, I would love to, though.
Okay. I think anybody else has any question? Otherwise, yeah. Well, one thing is like if Balu wants to join and he wants to answer. Somebody asked a question about how much milk fat in the chocolate, so he's going to answer.
Yes, somebody was asking how much milk fat can be added that will not affect the tempering. If you imagine, take a tempered chocolate bar, and then I have a magic wand. I take all the other particles, sugars, everything. I take it out, leaving only the cocoa butter in the chocolate. What you would like to see is a good network of all the small crystal clusters. They all join together. So that's the one that gives you the shape of the tempered chocolate. Anytime you do something to affect that, that's not going to allow it to temper. So what happens when you add too much fat? It's not the too much milk fat that affecting, it's too low chocolate butter, cocoa butter in the chocolate, that's going to affect. So you add it to the level that it doesn't affect the ability to form a network of connecting all the crystals, that when you break, it gives you the snap, you are fine. So that is the level that you can add the fat, milk fat, number one. Number two, the three main constituents that Amy was talking about, stearic acid, palmitic acid, and oleic acid, they are the major ones. So you want them to work together and form the good network of the crystals. So anything in the fat, milk fat, that's going to interfere forming the network of these three different fatty acids in the triglyceride, that's going to affect. So really, how much milk you add depending upon what milk fat you are adding to and how much you add. So the reason why you have to limit is to the extent, you don't want to add too much to affect the network structure.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It reminded me of this video. So in these two solutions, the one on the left has a much lower concentration of the part that's going to crystallize, the sodium acetate. And so you can think about that like the one on the left is one that has a lot of milk fat and not that much cocoa butter. And the one on the right is one that has a lot of cocoa butter and less milk fat. So you can see the one on the right crystallizes much easier. The crystallization grows much faster. The one on the left, if you can imagine other little crystals growing around, they have a much harder time connecting to each other, like you were saying.
In the tempered chocolate, the requirement is you don't want to have a too long big crystals, too many large crystals. You don't want that. You want to have a smaller crystals connected to each other, so we'll form a network like if you go and look at the electron microscope of bone, what you see is a calcium particles. They're all connected with a lot of holes in the middle. So that's the kind of structure you need to give the strength and snap for the main part in the tempered chocolate.
Yeah. I guess I was just showing that to kind of illustrate what, if you were to look at it on a really small scale, that would look like. But you're right, you want to have a lot of really small crystals, which is part of why you continue to mix chocolate as you're tempering it. If you were to mix this kind of, or if you were to mix this solution, you would see a bunch of little small crystals forming rather than single big ones that you're seeing because it's sitting very stationary.
Yeah, I think we are out of time now.
Thanks for that.
Okay, I think, let me see if there is any other question. Otherwise, it's 12 o'clock. And
Thanks everyone for your great questions. I've really enjoyed getting to dig into this and show you all of this stuff.
I think it's 12 o'clock. So there are a couple of questions, but we can send it as an email, like Amy said. So we thank you for joining us, because without the participants, the webinar doesn't have any use. So thank you, Amy, for presenting, and thank you all the participants to making it, asking all the nice questions, and the very nice questions. Like a lot of people will get educated with this. Thank you, and we just want to remind everyone, we have the next webinar on next Saturday is on roasting, learning the ropes of roasting with Alan. So we want to see you there again, and then we will be sending you the link for the video, and also where as soon as Amy has some time to answer the questions in a typed format, we will also post that on our website, so it will be there as a resource. Anytime you want, you can go and refer to it. Thank you all, and stay safe and healthy. Have a good day.
Have a good day, everyone.